I was in Brazil last week, and very, very fascinating country, and it was related to farming. And I'm talking to some people as to where do they go to eat. And I heard, we go to McDonald's. It's like, wait a minute, you're in Brazil and you go to McDonald's? And I asked the reason why, right? It's like, well, consistency is predictable. So there is a predictability, comfort aspect that actually drives people to that currency trust because they understand the brand and they understand what it is, right? The other set of people that I asked the question related to not just McDonald's, but in general, why you actually go to eat what you eat, it's all about the taste. So I think that there is a very emotional and visceral element in terms of what excites us about food, that regardless of the objective measure, I mean, you don't buy a car because it's objective and you did a list of pros and cons and you actually put it out there. It's all emotional. We know that. At the end of the day, the emotional impulse is what leads us to actually the action, is the movement, right? So, Noel, help us understand how Tyson is thinking about how to get people excited about food.
Yeah, I mean, I spend all day thinking about that. So we live in a very dynamic environment, right? I mean, that's just been a key theme as we've been talking about all these macro trends and how things have evolved over the past, decade to the past year and what that's going to look like moving forward. That's going to continue to be the case, but in my mind, there's in that dynamic environment, there's also consistency of ensuring that we approach it in a way that's going to unlock growth. And for me, there's a handful of things. The first is anticipating. We've talked a lot about that. The second is, as we think about consumer insights, and we have a great team here that helps us really distill and understand simple truths. And we've touched on it a bit on the panel of the authenticity and being genuine about really where does your brand stand today, and the courage to ensure that you may have opportunities and you may not be where you need to be, and you have to have the vulnerability to make sure that you embrace that. And then from there, I like to think of brands as people. It helps me as a way of being a marketer and a business leader to know that the brands that we're creating and the authenticity and the trust that we're asking of consumers, that we understand the brand, what it stands for, how does it show up in the world, what kind of conversations does it want to have, where does it show up. That, I feel like, helps ensure that you're connecting with consumers in a very authentic way. And then the last is speed. Speed is one of those things, we need to be moving as fast as the world is around us. And with that is going to, have some level of discomfort associated with it. And for me, that's a sweet spot where if you're not comfortable, you're probably comfortable. And so going back to your question, I think if you're doing all of those things, and it's a bit of a loop, for me, that's what becomes a way to really connect with consumers in a lasting, emotional way.
Very nice. Anybody wants to add or debate or elaborate on that?
I'll kind of call shade to myself. So I said science was the first thing, but we as Americans in the 1980s were given one of the greatest all-time dupes by science, and that was the food pyramid. Think about the food pyramid and what it represented in the 1980s. USDA came out with this pyramid that said you eat a lot of carbohydrates and starches, and at the top, you want to have as minimal fat in your diet as all. Well, we've come to realize, and for those of you who don't believe it, in the last couple of years, that maybe it should be flipped. So if you think about what the food pyramid did to obesity rates in this country since it came out in the 80s, it's been a tremendous drain on our healthcare system and productivity as human beings. So I guess to your point, Orlando, you sort of trust yourself, trust your own gut, no pun intended, and go with what works for your body, because every body is different.
Yeah, and I would agree. So transparency, authenticity, and your idea of sort of personal empiricism is just exploding. And so again, to tie it back to the area I spend my time in, those reviews that Noel mentioned, while the typical food product has far fewer reviews than a television, as an example, go find some of the best-selling items on an Amazon or Amazon Fresh and dig in, the level of detail from the people that actually take time not just to buy and consume, but go sit at their laptop and tell you what they thought. They're talking about the specific attributes, they're talking about the flavor, the impact it had on their health. And so, they are looking for truth. They are also sharing their personal experience, and it's all out there. So I think it is getting harder for industry certifications for a certain segment of the market that's sort of a high information segment. They're not going to rely exclusively on a certification. They're going to go look at what other people like them, who they perceive don't necessarily have any paid agenda, what are they looking for? And you mentioned fake news. It's a moving target, to be honest. Amazon has had to put little badges in that say this is a verified purchase because people were astroturfing, and you can plant reviews, and you can rate a review for helpfulness, and the ones that are rated as helpful by the most people get surfaced to the top. So it is a constantly moving target, but I think the bottom line is people increasingly trust people like them above all.
So these reviewers are actually getting the farmers further away from consumers, right? Because now the reviewer needs an audit to be able to get, so there's no way for the farmers to have a seat on the table. There's no farm to table anymore. This is like way out there.